say that.
Thanks.
Okay, so we are live. We are live and ready to go again. So it is still January 14th, and we are continuing our conversation corrections. And we have with us Steve Howard, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont State Employees Association.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I think the only person you haven't met yet,
John
our new member.
Nice to meet you. Welcome. Thank you, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. Do you have a question already?
I did.
Okay.
And I think Senator Plunkett and I have the same question. So, what do you think of the last presentation? What's your take on that? Is it valuable to you? Is it what you can use? Or sorry, I'll let you answer the question.
Yeah, no, I think it is very valuable, and it's a study that we quote quite often in making the case, some of the case that will make this testimony. I would say a little earlier that, well, first of all, I think the 94% in Springfield, the number of folks who say we don't have enough staff to adequately run the facility is accurate. My guess is it would be higher in Newport, where their staffing is even worse, closer to 100%, I would bet, in Newport. And in different facilities, one of the things that's interesting, and I had a conversation with Richard Murat about this. So my 13 years of working with VSEA and spending a significant amount of time in correctional facilities, what's clear to me is that we don't have a system of correctional facilities. We have 6 different individual correctional facilities. And if you try to run it as a system, which sometimes central office does, you miss the nuances in the culture and in the practice and how they perceive things. And, you know, in a couple of other facilities, you might have a different response right now. I think Marble Valley, their staffing is pretty much on track. The issue with Marble Valley is they have an honors unit that's somewhat controversial. It's not working as well there as it has in other facilities, at least according to the correctional officers that I've spoken to. And incidentally, you're getting me right off of a pretty much 6-month stakeout of all the correctional work sites. We had an election, which we thankfully won, but it required a lot of time in the correctional facilities and in the PUP offices across the state for the last 6 months. Just listening and talking to correctional officers. So I think PRIM is a good program. I think it's.
Where's the value come from, Steve? Where's the help us understand that? We probably already have our own, ideas about where it is, but where's the value to it?
The value of this other
research.
I think what's key, what comes across to me, and this is the same. I'm going to use the same testimony I gave yesterday in House. And yeah,
We want to be a little bit more special.
yeah, it's the same. So the whole ballgame is staffing, and it's because all of the reforms that folks have tried to implement, and all of the stuff that is in the PRIM report that needs to be implemented in order to have people feel more prepared. All of that is dependent on having safe staffing in the correctional facilities. And the reason for that, we have a slide on this as well, is that when there isn't enough staff, the facilities go into either partial lockdown or full lockdown, which means there's no education, there's no rec, there's no nothing. People are just sitting in their cells, and that happens quite frequently because of staffing. And so we don't have enough resources to run the facility. We don't have enough resources to adequately prepare people. And I don't know. And so in Newport's an example, caseworkers in Newport, because the staffing are all required to work 1 day at a security post. So that's a 1 day out of their week that they're not planning for reentry. They're not doing any of the work they were originally hired to do because we don't have enough people to secure the facility. And so I think that's what I've been trying to get across to folks is whether care about the staff and that's your primary concern, or you care about the incarcerated and that's your primary concern. Both, all of that is dependent on having enough staff. I'm not surprised to see the increase from 2024 to 2026, two things are true that I think had a big impact. One was a negotiated change in overtime category for the CO1, CO2s, which some of other things say controversial. The second is the end of double time. And when we lost double time for coming in on your day off, or if you are a non-security, if you're in a non-security position, or in the field, if you had the double time incentive, we had a flood of people coming in. The reason why people leave and the staff get out of the staff facilities is because we are running 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift after 16-hour shift. And between the physical exhaustion and the physical impact on people and the family pressure from families, they quit. And we have no problem hiring people in the park. We have a huge problem. I think Commissioner Murat and I agree on this. Commissioner Gamble before me. We have a huge problem with retaining. Can't keep them at the facility. And so I think you have to get those 16-hour shifts under control. And there's a couple of ideas that we have suggested. One, we're not going to ask the legislature to be involved in any of this because it's an issue of collective bargaining. We can't ask the legislature and the administration again either for anything that was a subject of bargaining. We haven't started bargaining yet with corrections. But I've said repeatedly to the commissioner, member states, be in every facility I've been in, double time worked. It costs money, but it did get the overtime down so that we could create a critical mass, keep the overtime, keep the 16-hour shifts to a minimum, so people stay, so we can keep hiring people to get to a safe staffing level. And it's kind of a tough challenge, but it's one of the things that we have to focus on. The job itself is a difficult job. The statistics bear that out. The life expectancy of a correctional officer is 59 years old. The rest of us will live to like 72 or maybe 77, I think it is.
Is that a national number?
Yes, that's a national number. The research for that was done at Southern Illinois University. They have much higher rates of PTSD. They have PTSD rates that are sometimes higher than those of veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. So getting away from the facility, getting away from the PMP office and being able to have a life is really crucial. One of the big challenges is the TV ads ran incessantly. We all saw them, which corrections promised a work-life balance under a schedule called 223 that never materialized. They did a little bit slightly in St. Johnsbury, but they're the exception to the rule. And even there, I've been in a million labor management meetings there, the superintendent will tell you, they are 1 or 2 med trips away from having to call people in from their day off to come cover posts at that facility. It's worked best there. It hasn't worked in other places. It probably could have worked if we had enough people. And maybe someday we'll get to that point where we will have enough people, and then it would really be a thing. I mean, I understand what corrections was trying to do. It's like the chicken and the egg. They were trying to impose a schedule for which there weren't enough people available to work, in hopes that it would attract enough people and maintain enough people so that it would balance out. And that just never happened. They were counting people on the schedule, people whose names are on the schedule, but who are not available to work. They're on temporary leave from duty, they're at the academy, they're at military orders, or workers' comp. This is a very physical job. And it just doomed the schedule from the start. So I mean, that's kind of where to me, this is the number one issue facing corrections that policymakers can focus on. The staffing crisis is the number one issue. I don't want to say it's the only issue, but it's like, if you want to solve 10 other issues, solve this one first. So we want to take a sort of a different approach than I usually take you talked a little bit yesterday with the other body with how our members view the role of the legislature and the role of the committees of jurisdiction in this process. We believe that you have the power and the weight of oversight, and that your job is to hold the executive branch accountable. It is our job to represent to you and to the executive branch what our members are telling us is happening in real time in their work experience. I mean, in the facilities where they're working. And it's, as I said before, it's not just a concern for us, it's a concern for the incarcerated population, getting the services that they need. But it's also part of the public. Like, we've heard a lot of discussion of late about public safety. We have a special prosecutor that's working in Chittenden County. We've got state police that are walking the beat and on Church Street. We've got, a new judge that's been called in for those offenders who have multiple cases before the courts. All great stuff. The provision that we're missing in that plan, there's two things for this. One is we don't have enough correctional officers, so that when those folks are either held without bail, held with bail, or are convicted, we don't have enough correctional officers to adequately staff the correctional facilities. So that's a major point of the public safety paradigm that we have to address. The victim advocates and the admin staff in the Chittenden County State's Attorney's Office who we represent will tell you that the judicial staff at the courthouse have been overrun with work because nobody provided them with additional resources. And they're holding it together, but if we really want to do it, we got to do it. We got to adequately fund it, and we got to put new people in, more people in to do it. And corrections is a major part of that. We would ask this committee, as we ask the committee of jurisdiction across the hall, across the building, and also the government operations committee across the hall, to hold weekly hearings, weekly meetings on this subject, to require regular in-depth data from the administration, and to use the resource of the JFO to give you impartial analysis of the numbers. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. One of the things we would suggest, I've done this in some cases where I can get this information. Every day I look at the schedule. I look at how much yellow is on the schedule, and that tells me how many people have been called in on their day off. Look at how many posts have been collapsed because they didn't have correctional officers for those posts. I look at how many people were called in early or agreed to stay late. And I think what would be really helpful for this committee is to get those schedules, get JFO to analyze those schedules on some kind of regular pattern, weekly, bi-weekly, and report to you what the numbers look like across the 6 facilities. I think that would tell you, I'll just be honest, we have a new commissioner and we hope it's a new day, and our members are excited that he has a law enforcement background. We're excited about his beginning because we saw him stand up for his frontline law enforcement officers when the politicians in Burlington were giving him a problem. He stood his ground. We need him to do that here, and really encourage the governor to make the kind of commitment and investment in public safety with corrections involved in that we haven't seen today. So the weekly hearings will help keep the pressure on the administration to keep this issue at the forefront. It will keep the press informed about what's happening, and we know the more the public knows about it, the more the governor's office tends to care about it. And not just this governor, but any governor, any party. So we would encourage that as well. Who should be in these hearings? We would ask you to bring in the Secretary of Administration, Secretary of Human Services, the Commissioner of DHR, and the Commissioner of Corrections. And you can every single week ask them what they did that week before to solve the staffing crisis. And just keep, while you're here, as much pressure on them as possible, knowing that they're going to be asked to come in the week after, the week after, and the week after, that this issue cannot get swept under the rug. And it has to rise to a high level. We can't just dismiss this as it's corrections department's problem. This is something that's got to have the Secretary of Administration, the Secretary of Human Services. If we're going to have this agency and this department in the Agency of Human Services, we have to hear more from the Secretary. We almost never hear her talk about corrections. I've only met her a few times. It's a perfectly nice person, very impressive person. But we just haven't seen that this is a department that's a priority in the agency. It leaves a lot of our members believing that this should be a department that's in the Department of Public Safety. Because they feel like they're sort of forgotten in the mass of the Department of the Agency of Human Services. And so we would ask you to consider doing that. We'd ask you to look at other states, to really look at the 50 states, look what's going on in those states. What are they doing there? Where are the states that have the best employee numbers and the best employee retention? What are they doing differently that we could put on the table here? And you can't necessarily do it. It's an executive function, but you certainly can shine a light on it. And you certainly can bring pressure to the administration to consider some of the things that have worked in other states. We have seen things like hiring incentives, retention incentives that are much bigger than we've ever considered here. And in particular, places like the Senator's District, where the pool of available people is much smaller. You have all sorts of different issues. Chittenden County, you have a much larger pool, but so many other options for deployment. In Essex Orleans and around the Newport facility, much smaller pool, fewer options for employment. Although there are some, and people are taking them because they don't require the 16-hour shifts. They don't require the very difficult, physically demanding, dangerous work that a correctional officer faces. We'd also ask you to invite the DSEA to come in with the administration at those weekly meetings so that we can include the perspective that we hear. You can say where our members agree or disagree with what the administration testified. You've done that periodically before. We'd like to see that on a weekly basis. It's such a serious issue from a public safety standpoint, but also from a criminal justice reform standpoint. So we want that 40% retention recidivism rate to come down. We've got to prepare people better. I think the study shows that. And it starts with the correctional staff. And what our members tell you is like, you can go to the 6-week academy and you can go through that training, but until you've been a correctional officer and you've been there long enough to know how to do the job in really trying circumstances, you really don't know how to do the job. You have to do the work in order to know work. Some people have suggested that maybe some of our members have suggested to me that maybe we rethink the academy and the length of the academy, and maybe we should have more on-the-job training, people being deployed in the facility they're going to work in, and working side by side with seasoned correctional officers to see what it's really like, and less of an academic approach. Maybe continue some of the training that's happening at the academy, at the facility, so that they can also work. It would also get people on the schedule faster and try to bring some of that over time. Yeah.
So just a question. So is that something that, or I guess the corrections or department would have to do that? That's something they would have to do.
Yeah, they'd have to do that. So we also provided the Joint Justice Oversight Committee, I think it was 2024, a list of data points that we think would be useful to the committee to request and to get updates on. And I don't think it has been, I don't think the committee actually did follow through on it because it's sort of the end of the year before the session started. But, what was the CO1, CO2 turnover rate? And we were suggesting at least the last 5 or 6 years, because that's when the staffing crisis has been worse. What is the CO1, CO2 turnover rate separated by job class? What's the vacancy rate separated by job class? How many shifts did correctional workers have to work in excess of 12 hours? How many correctional officers were called in on their day off because of lack of staff? How many people volunteered to come in on their day off because of the lack of staff? And just to note, this is sort of important for people. You wouldn't know this unless you talk to correctional officers, but our members volunteer often for overtime because they see the schedule, they know they're going to be ordered in. And if you volunteer, you get to pick your post. If you're ordered in, you go with the battalion. So in order to get the post they want, they'll often volunteer. So what you may hear from management is say, oh, we don't have that big a problem because all these people are volunteering.
How come So I gotta just stop you a little bit. I apologize. But I do. I'd asked you one time before. Probably twice I've asked you. Is there anything good that the administration's ever done? And you said no. You couldn't tell anything. But when I talk to my people at the facility, which 95% of them vote for me, they love their job. They love it.
Oh, yeah.
They love being, they love the overtime. They love the money. I've got a good friend of mine, Brad Urey, just retired after 25 years. I've got another guy that retired after 20 years. I've got another guy that retired after 25 years. These were people who had nothing in their lives. They were builders, they were laborers, they were whatever, and they work there now, and now they have retirement and they have a pension and all of that stuff. So to be fair, I'm just being honest. It's hard to sit here and hear where my friends have really spoke well and be proud about where they work, to hear you tear it down. And it's very troubling at times, Steve. It really, really is, because I don't hear the same things that you're trying to tell us.
Sure.
And I don't.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. First of all, our members are very proud of the work that they do. They are important parts of the public safety infrastructure. That's absolutely true. You saw the statistics at Springfield, 94% saying in the survey, not enough resources. So what has the administration done that was good? So Jim Baker was the commissioner during COVID. We worked with him hand in hand and negotiated a side letter of agreement that brought the overtime down to almost nothing. His successor walked away from that agreement in 3 months. And the overtime.
But let's be honest about that time as well. There's less people going to prison. There were less people in the prison. There was less need for the overtime. There was less people moving around. They only had to be at one place or another. So it was a different time. And you also have other things available to you. You can take 150 prisoners right now, people who did not have, that aren't from Vermont, and have been defended in Vermont, and you can ship them to Mississippi. So you by yourself could lower the amount of pressure that's in these prisons by advocating for that. And I get why you don't want to do that, because that takes work away from your members. So you can't have it both ways sometimes. You really, really can't. I mean, and again, $97,000 per prisoner here, I think the number is, maybe it's up over 100 now, versus $18,000 in Mississippi. It would be a lot better for the state to ship them down there, especially the people that weren't from Vermont, that offended here and don't have any ties to Vermont. And we don't really have any obligations to those people. So, it's just, it's a little tough sometimes.
Yeah, I think our opposition to private prisons isn't based on demand in the facilities. It's based on our analysis that the private prison industry is immoral and corrupt, and doesn't live up to the values of Vermonters.
If they're not from Vermont, what's it matter to us?
Well, I mean, that's a broader question, I think, beyond something I can answer, but I think it's important that you're held to account in the state where in the place where you do the damage, where you have made, you've caused harm for the community. That's a different discussion that VSEA is not really, hasn't really delved into, but our belief in the time during COVID, there was an effort to release many people. As you may recall, that the job responsibilities during the COVID pandemic grew substantially. And our members were outfitted in garbage bags and told to go into the COVID facilities without proper PPE. And the union fought for proper PPE. Now that wasn't necessarily the administration's fault. The whole nation was found unprepared for this pandemic, and the leadership at the time was slow to respond nationally, not just in Vermont. But I think the key thing that I hear, there's two things that I hear from our members pretty consistent, and I hear from them a lot in Newport. Really, I spent a lot of time in Newport. Was just up there last week, sitting in the break room. We aren't paying our correctional officers enough. As you compare it to New England and as you compare it to the nation, we're below where we need to be. We have to change the culture of the department and how management interacts with folks in facilities. there is, as I think I've said in this committee before, a pretty pronounced disaffection with central office from the management in central office, not the frontline staff in central office, but there's a feeling, and you saw it in the earlier print reports, where they asked the question, does the management understand my job? No. Does the management consult me? No. Seeing numbers, 80, 90%. And so what we hear from our members is that they call central office the Crystal Palace. Because policies come out one and the other and the other, and it's make absolutely no sense to people working on the front lines, and nobody bothered to ask them about it.
And with that, is it in the field and in the facilities, or
Pretty consistent. So one of the things that we've suggested, going back to Commissioner Bernard, which goes back several years, is that in a time when we have a crisis as pronounced as like the one we had in Newport, and in other facilities, and you see it in Springfield, is that managers who have been trained at taxpayer expense, they've gone through the academy, they've worked in facilities, and now they're working in central office. We have asked commissioner to assign those managers to the hotspots, and not just in the facilities, but in the field. So one of the things that's happening in the field is, in addition to the work supervising folks in the communities, when there is hospital coverage, somebody has gone to the hospital, there has to be a corrections presence in the hospital. And for a long time, it was just being picked up by our probation and parole offices, in addition to everything else they had to do supervising people in the community. And when they weren't at the hospital, they were on standby, which means you have to be within an hour of reporting to the hospital. They cannot drink, they can't do anything, and be ready to work. And they're paid a little bit for it, paid a fifth of their salary. Not enough to really break away from corrections for at least a day or two and replay your life a bit. So we could have managers do that in addition to probation. The point would be to say we're all in this together. All means all. And the practical piece of that is relationships would be built, relationships would be repaired. Managers could see what the practical application of their policies really is on the front lines. And some of that divide that exists could be shrunk. So I've advocated for it, not just as a means of trying to stabilize the schedule, but as an opportunity for managers to learn how things are really working in the real world, outside of what they see in central office. A lot of times, and this commissioner, I've run into him in a few facilities since he started, but a lot of times what you see with the leadership of the department is there's a dog and pony show organized. You know that legislators are coming, or you know that the commissioner's coming, and so they clean everything up and they get everything, organized, but you only see what they want you to see. And often you see nobody talks to the frontline folks. They see them come in, go through, they see them talk to the management, they see them leave. So they call it a dog and pony show. It's sort of set up for people. They don't see the real thing. Just to get back to some of the data that I think really would be helpful to you on recruitment, looking at quarterly and annual recruitment numbers. You recruit a ton of people. It's like $10,000, $15,000 a pop, send them through the academy. What do the numbers look like in terms of retention? That's a lot of money to train somebody, give them put all that money into them, and have them not even make it the first year of service at the facility. How many people completed a probationary period? How many people lasted 1 year, 2 years, 5 years? It's like really important metrics to look at. In the P&P area, probation and parole, how many people, what's the quarterly and annual number of hours people were on call, either for the facility or for hospital coverage? What's the quarterly annual numbers of hospital coverage call-ins performed by P&P officers? How many were called in from their days off, and how many were called in during the workday? I think those are pretty important metrics to look at. And then getting at the services to the offenders. How many times has a facility been locked down, full lockdown, partial lockdown? How many times have educational opportunities been canceled? How many times have recreational opportunities been canceled? How many times have correctional officers not been able to get a bathroom, which does happen? And then to look back again for a 5 or 6 year period.
Now, isn't that something you can do with Corinne? Get those.
Could
data,
could the committee do that?
process, yeah, or just the committee.
They could, I mean, you as a committee of jurisdiction and with oversight responsibility could request it directly from the department. And our suggestion is that a lot of it go to JFO and have them analyze it. I mean, especially the schedules, so that you can see the actual schedules. So what often happens is, at least it's happened in recent years, administration will come in and testify on staffing numbers and say, oh, isn't it great? And often they're including all the staff in the facility, admin staff, like not the CO1 classification or the CO2 classification, just they include everybody. And we've had real time, our members say what they just said about the staffing number in this particular facility isn't what I see on the schedule here. So there's a disconnect between what they're reporting to you and what was on the schedule. And that's why I thought, oh, it would really be helpful if you got the schedules from each facility, JFO analyzed it, showed you what reported to you, what they said. We think if, as to the extent that exit interviews exist from CO1, CO2s in particular, maybe all classes, but in those particular, we'd ask that you get a hold of those anonymized exit interviews and see what people say about why they were leaving, whether they're previous, people have already left or people who are just recently leaving. I think that's an important, it's a lot of taxpayer funds being spent on training people for this work. And it is an important part of the public safety configuration that the public is demanding more of. It seems like that getting into this issue, doing a deep dive into this issue is something that would be worthwhile on behalf of the taxpayers. Talked about already that managers being assigned. So, we see this as a real opportunity. We think we have a chance to work. We don't know if I guess the commissioner is an interim commissioner. We don't know if he's going to be appointed permanently. If he is, we'll work as basically what BSEA's position is that we will work with anybody who is willing to help us solve this now 6-year-long staffing crisis. This has been, I started 13 years ago at BSEA. When I started, the biggest complaint was we had too many people lining up to be correctional officers. Now we have, please help with this overtime. Please do something. I'm desperate. And that's in all 6 facilities. It's a little bit less in some of the smaller facilities, but the bigger facilities are really Newport and Springfield are the hot spots for not having enough people to adequately safely staff. And safely is the key word, safely staff the facilities. The other thing I think is really important, correctional officers don't just keep other correctional officers safe, they keep other offenders safe. They keep the offenders safe. The vulnerable offenders are kept safe by our members. And we've had in some cases, testimony, for instance, not testimony, but just sitting in the break room talking to correctional officers in Marble Valley, the honor unit there. Inmates that don't want to go into the honor unit because of the concern about the presence of gangs in the honor unit and the lack of supervision by correctional officers. Evidence of bruises and looks like somebody got beat up in that unit. And, of course, people aren't going to say that for their own safety. They're going to say they fell or something happened. But correctional officers, seasoned ones especially, know what really happened. So it's not to say that's a totally bad concept because in Springfield it works a little bit better, but I know that's what I heard repeatedly just sitting in that facility over the last 6 months. Madam Chair, that's my testimony.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. And you provided this information in your recommendations to the House Committee, correct?
Yeah, and I believe you emailed it to the committee, here's committee too, so.
Okay,
You know, we decided to take the approach to not just say, well, here's the problem. We figure you understand this problem. What we thought is, okay, how do we help, how do we advise the committee from our perspective, the legislature from our perspective, on how they really truly can understand the depth of the problem? And this is some of the data points that our members suggested. That they committee looking at.
all right, good. I think it was very clear. I think your recommendations are very clear. Excellent.
All right.
Any questions? Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Take care.
All right. Tomorrow, it's also a 2:00 meeting. Almost adjourned. I just wanna talk about tomorrow. And we have an update on the implementation of kids code. That's right now, that's the only thing on the agenda. I'm fine with that. Anybody have anything else you want to talk about or any? I mean, I talked from yesterday, and we probably should have a conversation at some point. We could have it at 1:30 tomorrow. Unless you want to do it a different day. And that's fine. I'm not in a rush.
Chat with you about it.
Okay, so right as of this point in time, the next time we meet will be 2:00 in the. I'm sorry?
If it changes, you know what to do.
Yes, and does anybody want it to be earlier?
Find whatever chair says.
Okay, good. So then we'll keep it that way and we are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.